The scorching heat of the Mojave Desert, in July 1894, had already claimed the lives of countless travelers who had underestimated the brutal power of the California wasteland. But rancher Josh Crawford, had never encountered anything as horrific as what he discovered near Devil's Canyon, on that fateful morning when the temperature would reach 127 degrees before noon. Josh operated the Ironwood Ranch, a hardy operation that covered 8,000 acres of high desert terrain, about 60 miles northeast of Los Angeles, where he raised cattle and horses that could survive in conditions that would kill livestock from more temperate regions. At 37, Josh had spent 15 years learning to read the desert's moods and dangers, developing an almost supernatural ability to find water, predict weather patterns, and navigate terrain that appeared identical to inexperienced eyes. The ranch was positioned along one of the few reliable wagon routes through the Mojave, making it a crucial stopping point for travelers heading to or from the gold fields of Northern California. Josh maintained a way station that provided water, supplies, and temporary shelter for people making the dangerous journey across the desert, charging modest fees that helped sustain his operation while serving the broader community of desert travelers. But Josh's discovery on July 15th involved travelers who would never reach their destination, and a woman whose final words would reveal secrets that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Josh had ridden out early that morning to check his outlying water sources, a routine inspection that had become even more critical during the intense heat wave that had gripped Southern California for the past week. The desert's normal brutality had been amplified to deadly levels, creating conditions that could kill an unprepared person within hours of exposure. As Josh rode along the rim of Devil's Canyon, following ancient Indian trails that provided the safest passage through the rocky terrain, he noticed vultures circling about 2 miles to the south. The behavior of the scavenger birds immediately alerted Josh to the presence of death somewhere in the desert below, though he hoped it might be a dead animal rather than human remains. What Josh found when he investigated the vulture's interest was a scene of abandonment and desperation that challenged his understanding of human cruelty. Scattered across a flat stretch of desert were the remains of what had obviously been a small wagon, train to overturned wagons, dead horses, and evidence of a camp that had been hastily abandoned. But most shocking was the discovery of a woman who had been left behind to die alone in the merciless heat of the desert. She was lying in the minimal shade provided by one of the overturned wagons, barely conscious and obviously in the final stages of death from dehydration and exposure. Josh dismounted immediately and approached the woman carefully, unsure whether she was still alive or if he had arrived too late to provide any assistance. As he knelt beside her, he could see that she appeared to be in her early 30s, well-dressed, despite her current condition, and wearing jewelry that suggested she came from circumstances of considerable wealth. "Ma'am," Josh said gently, "can you hear me? I'm here to help you." The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing intelligence and awareness despite her obviously critical condition. When she tried to speak, her voice was barely a whisper, her lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration. "Water," she managed to say, the single word conveying both desperate need and fading hope. Josh immediately provided water from his canteen, supporting the woman's head as he helped her take small sips of the precious liquid. He knew that giving water too quickly to someone in advanced dehydration could be dangerous, but he also understood that without immediate hydration, the woman would die within hours. This rescue attempt is about to reveal the most shocking betrayal you've ever heard. Hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories about secrets that change everything. As the woman gradually regained some strength from the water, Josh was able to assess her condition more thoroughly. She had been without water for at least 2 days, possibly longer, and had sustained injuries that suggested she had been deliberately abandoned rather than accidentally left behind. "Ma'am," Josh said, as he continued to provide water in small, careful amounts, "what happened here? Where is everyone else?" "Gone," the woman replied, her voice still weak but becoming clearer as the water began to restore some of her strength. "They left me, ... They took everything and left me to die." Josh looked around at the scene more carefully, trying to understand what had happened to the wagon train and why this woman had been abandoned. The overturned wagons showed signs of deliberate damage rather than accident, and the scattered belongings suggested that the camp had been looted before being abandoned. "Who left you?" Josh asked. "What was your relationship to the other travelers?" The woman's expression changed as Josh asked about the people who had abandoned her, revealing pain that went beyond physical suffering. When she answered, her words carried a bitterness that spoke of betrayal by people she had trusted completely. My husband, she said, the words barely audible. My husband and his business partners. They brought me here to kill me. Josh felt a chill despite the oppressive heat as he processed what the woman was telling him, if her account was accurate. He was looking at evidence of attempted murder, rather than simple abandonment. And the woman's condition suggested that the attempt had very nearly succeeded. Ma'am, what's your name? Josh asked. And why would your husband want to hurt you? Catherine. Catherine Ashford, the woman replied. My husband is Thomas Ashford of San Francisco, and he wants me dead because I discovered what he's been doing with his shipping business. Josh recognized the name Thomas Ashford as one of San Francisco's most prominent businessmen, a shipping magnate whose company controlled much of the maritime trade between California and Asia. If Catherine Ashford was telling the truth, then Josh had stumbled into a situation involving some of the most powerful people on the West Coast. Mrs. Ashford, Josh said, I need to get you back to my ranch where you can receive proper medical care. Can you travel if I support you? Mr. Catherine asked, not knowing Josh's name. Crawford, Josh replied. Joshua Crawford. I operate a ranch about 6 miles from here. Mr. Crawford, Catherine said. Before we go anywhere, I need to tell you something important. If I die, you need to know what Thomas has done, and you need to make sure that others learn the truth. Josh could see that Catherine was gathering her remaining strength for what she obviously considered a crucial revelation. Despite her critical condition, she seemed determined to share information that she viewed as more important than her own survival. Mrs. Ashford, let's get you to safety first, Josh said. You can tell me everything once you've had proper medical care. No, Catherine replied with surprising firmness. I may not survive the journey, and this information is too important to die with me. Thomas and his partners have been using their shipping business to smuggle opium into California, and they've been killing anyone who threatens to expose them. Josh felt the weight of Catherine's revelation, as he understood that she was entrusting him with information that could destroy some of the most powerful men in California, while also explaining why her husband had been willing to commit murder. To silence her, as Josh carefully lifted Catherine and prepared to transport her to his ranch, he realized that saving her life was only the beginning of a situation that would test his courage, his principles, and his understanding of justice in ways he had never imagined. But first, he had to get Catherine Ashford to safety, knowing that her survival might be the only thing standing between a criminal conspiracy and the destruction of anyone who threatened to expose it. Secrets and survival. The journey from Devil's Canyon to the Ironwood Ranch tested both Josh Crawford's desert survival skills and Catherine Ashford's rapidly failing strength, as the brutal July heat continued to climb toward levels that made travel during daylight hours potentially fatal, even for experienced desert dwellers. Josh had fashioned a makeshift stretcher using canvas from one of the abandoned wagons and poles salvaged from the wreckage, creating a shelter that would protect Catherine from direct sun exposure, while allowing him to transport her across the rocky terrain. But even with these precautions, Josh knew that Catherine's survival depended on reaching the ranch quickly and providing her with medical care that went far beyond simple rehydration. During the slow journey across the desert, Catherine drifted in and out of consciousness. But during her lucid moments, she continued to share details about the criminal conspiracy that had led to her abandonment in the wasteland. Her revelations painted a picture of corruption and violence that extended far beyond what Josh had initially understood. Mr. Crawford, Catherine said, during one of her more alert periods, you need to understand what you're getting involved with. Thomas and his partners have killed at least 6 people who threatened to expose their opium operation. They have connections in the police department, the customs office, and the mayor's office in San Francisco. Mrs. Ashford, Josh replied, as he carefully navigated around a cluster of rocks that blocked their path. How did you discover what your husband was doing? I found documents in his study that detailed shipments that didn't match the cargo manifests filed with customs, Catherine explained. When I confronted Thomas about the discrepancies, he initially tried to convince me that I had misunderstood what I was seeing. But when I threatened to take the evidence to federal authorities, he decided that I had become too dangerous to live. Josh was beginning to understand the scope of the criminal enterprise that Catherine had uncovered, and the level of danger that both of them now faced. If Thomas Ashford was willing to murder his own wife to protect his secrets, he would certainly be willing to kill a desert rancher who possessed the same information. How did he get you out here? Josh asked. He told me that we were taking a vacation trip to visit his business partner's mining operation near Barstow, Catherine replied. I thought it was strange that Thomas wanted to travel during the hottest part of summer, but I was hoping that time away from San Francisco might help us work through our marriage problems. Catherine went on to explain that the vacation trip had been carefully planned as an assassination attempt. Thomas and his 3 business partners had brought Catherine into the desert under false pretenses, then staged what appeared to be a wagon breakdown in an area where she was unlikely to be found before dying of exposure. They took all the water except for one small canteen, Catherine said, and they damaged the wagons so that I couldn't use them for shelter. Thomas told me that if I died quietly, he would make sure that my family received a generous settlement from my life insurance. If I tried to survive and expose him, he would kill my sister and her children. Josh felt his anger building as he understood the calculated cruelty of Thomas Ashford's plan. The man had not only attempted to murder his wife, but had also threatened the lives of innocent family members to ensure her compliance with her own execution. When they finally reached the Ironwood Ranch, Josh immediately began the process of providing Catherine with the medical care she desperately needed. He had considerable experience treating dehydration and heat exposure, having learned from a doctor in Los Angeles who specialized in treating desert casualties. Josh's ranch house was designed to provide relief from the desert heat, with thick adobe walls, cross-ventilation, and a covered porch that created cooling shade during the hottest parts of the day. He installed Catherine in the coolest room of the house and began the careful process of rehydration and temperature reduction that could mean the difference between recovery and death. But even as Josh worked to save Catherine's life, he was acutely aware that her presence at his ranch created dangers that extended far beyond medical concerns. If Thomas Ashford learned that his wife had survived and was sharing information about his criminal activities, he would certainly send people to eliminate both Catherine and anyone who had helped her. Mrs. Ashford, Josh said, as Catherine showed signs of improvement after several hours of careful medical attention, we need to discuss what happens next. If your husband believes you're dead, you might have an advantage that we can use to expose his crimes. Mr. Crawford, Catherine replied, I've been thinking about that during the journey here. If Thomas thinks I'm dead, he might become careless about destroying evidence or covering his tracks. But if he discovers that I'm alive, he'll do everything possible to kill both of us. Josh understood that they were facing a strategic challenge that required careful planning and outside assistance. Catherine's survival was only the first step in a process that would ultimately require them to outmaneuver some of the most powerful and dangerous men in California. You won't believe the incredible plan they're about to devise. Hit that subscribe button because this cat-and-mouse game with killers is about to become legendary. Over the next 3 days, as Catherine continued to recover her strength, she and Josh developed a plan that would allow them to gather additional evidence about Thomas Ashford's criminal activities while protecting themselves from retaliation. The plan required them to work with federal authorities who had jurisdiction over customs violations and interstate crime, bypassing the local officials who might be corrupted by Ashford's influence. Catherine revealed that she had hidden copies of incriminating documents at her sister's house in Sacramento, providing evidence that could support federal charges against her husband and his partners. But retrieving those documents would require careful coordination to avoid alerting Thomas to Catherine's survival. Mr. Crawford, Catherine said, I need to ask you to do something that will put you at considerable risk. Would you be willing to travel to Sacramento and retrieve the documents from my sister? You're the only person who can do this without arousing suspicion. Josh considered Catherine's request, understanding that agreeing would involve him deeply in a dangerous conspiracy, while refusing would leave her without the evidence needed to bring her husband to justice. Mrs. Ashford, Josh replied, I'll do whatever is necessary to help you expose these crimes. But we need to be smart about how we proceed. The plan they developed involved Josh traveling to Sacramento under the pretense of conducting normal ranch business, while secretly meeting with Catherine's sister to retrieve the hidden documents. Meanwhile, Catherine would remain at the Ironwood Ranch, officially dead, according to anyone who might be watching for signs of her survival. But their careful planning would soon be tested by developments that neither of them had anticipated. As Thomas Ashford's network of associates began investigating the area where Catherine had been abandoned, looking for confirmation of her death and evidence of any witnesses who might have discovered her body, the cat-and-mouse game that followed would test both Josh's courage and Catherine's strategic thinking, while forcing them to confront the reality that their fight for justice had made them targets for elimination by people who had already proven their willingness to commit murder to protect their secrets. The hunter becomes the hunted. Josh Crawford's journey to Sacramento to retrieve the documents that Catherine Ashford had hidden at her sister's house proceeded without incident. But his return to the Mojave Desert brought news that transformed their situation from one of careful planning to immediate danger. During Josh's 3-day absence, riders had been seen in the area around Devil's Canyon, obviously searching for something or someone in the vicinity where Catherine had been abandoned. Maria Santos, Josh's housekeeper, and the only other person at the ranch who knew about Catherine's presence, reported that 2 men had visited the ranch claiming to be looking for stray cattle. But their questions and behavior suggested they were actually searching for evidence of Catherine's survival. "Senator Josh," Maria said, as he returned from Sacramento, "these men. They asked many questions about whether anyone had been seen in the desert, whether you had found anything unusual during your travels. They said they were ranchers, but they did not know things that real ranchers would know." Josh immediately understood that Thomas Ashford's associates were conducting a systematic search of the area, probably trying to determine whether Catherine's body had been found and whether any witnesses existed who could connect her death to her husband's criminal activities. "Maria," Josh said, "did these men give you their names or say where they were from?" "They said they were from a ranch near Barstow, but when I asked about people I know in that area, they could not answer my questions," Maria replied. "I think they were not ranchers at all." Josh found Catherine in the ranch house, obviously recovered enough to move around but still showing the effects of her ordeal in the desert. When he shared the news about the suspicious visitors, Catherine's expression immediately reflected both fear and determination. "They're looking for my body," Catherine said. "Thomas wants confirmation that I'm dead before he returns to San Francisco. If they can't find my remains, he'll become suspicious and might send more people to investigate." Josh showed Catherine the documents he had retrieved from her sister's house in Sacramento, a collection of shipping records, financial ledgers, and correspondence that provided compelling evidence of the opium smuggling operation. The documents were more damaging than Catherine had initially indicated, revealing not only the scope of the criminal enterprise but also the names of government officials who had been bribed to facilitate the illegal activities. "Catherine," Josh said as they reviewed the evidence together, "these documents could destroy your husband and his entire network, but they also make you an even more dangerous threat to some very powerful people. That's exactly why we need to get this information to federal authorities as quickly as possible." Catherine replied, "Every day we wait gives Thomas more time to discover that I'm alive and to take steps to eliminate both of us." But their plans for contacting federal authorities were complicated by the arrival of additional searchers, who appeared to be conducting a more thorough investigation of the area around Devil's Canyon. Josh observed the new arrivals through field glasses from a concealed position on a ridge overlooking the canyon, and what he saw convinced him that they were dealing with professional killers rather than simple hired hands. The search party consisted of 6 men, all well armed and obviously experienced in desert travel. They were systematically examining the abandoned wagon site and expanding their search pattern to cover areas where someone might have found Catherine's body and transported it elsewhere. "They're not just looking for your body," Josh told Catherine after observing the search party's activities. "They're looking for any evidence that someone might have discovered you and taken you somewhere for medical care or burial." Catherine understood the implications of Josh's observations. "If they expand their search far enough, they'll eventually reach your ranch. We need to be prepared for the possibility that they'll come here asking questions." The plan that Josh and Catherine developed required them to create a convincing story that would explain Josh's recent travels while concealing any knowledge of Catherine's survival. They also needed to prepare for the possibility that the searchers might demand to investigate the ranch buildings, which would require them to hide both Catherine and the incriminating documents. "Josh," Catherine said, "there's something I need to tell you before these men arrive. If they discover that I'm alive, they'll kill both of us without hesitation. Thomas and his partners have murdered 6 people to protect their operation, and they won't hesitate to add 2 more names to that list." Josh had already understood the deadly nature of the threat they faced, but Catherine's direct statement forced him to confront the reality that his decision to help her had made him a target for assassination by people who had both the means and the motivation to kill anyone who threatened their interests. The test of their preparations came on the afternoon of Josh's 4th day back from Sacramento, when the search party arrived at the Ironwood Ranch demanding to speak with Josh about his recent activities and any unusual discoveries he might have made in the desert. The leader of the group introduced himself as Frank Daniels, claiming to represent a consortium of ranchers who were concerned about the safety of travelers in the area. But Josh immediately recognized that Daniels was no rancher. His hands showed no evidence of manual labor. His clothing was too expensive for frontier work, and his manner suggested someone accustomed to intimidating people rather than negotiating with them. "Mr. Crawford," Daniels said, "we're investigating the disappearance of some travelers who were last seen heading through this area about a week ago. Have you noticed any unusual activity or discovered anything that might be related to missing persons?" Josh had prepared for this question and delivered his response with the casual manner of someone who had nothing to hide. "I found some wagon wreckage in Devil's Canyon a few days ago, but there was no sign of people. Looked like the travelers had moved on after some kind of breakdown." "Did you search the area thoroughly?" Daniels asked, his tone becoming more aggressive. "Sometimes people who are injured or dehydrated might crawl away from their vehicles, looking for help. I looked around, but the vultures had been at work for several days," Josh replied. "If there were bodies, the scavengers had scattered the remains too much to find anything useful." Daniels studied Josh's face carefully, obviously trying to determine whether the rancher was telling the truth or concealing information about Catherine's fate. The other members of the search party positioned themselves around the ranch yard in a manner that suggested they were prepared for violence. "If their questions weren't answered satisfactorily, Mr. Crawford," Daniels continued, "we'd like to search your property to make sure that you haven't overlooked anything that might help us locate these missing travelers." Josh had anticipated this request and understood that refusing would create suspicions that could prove fatal for both him and Catherine. "You're welcome to look around," he said, "but I don't think you'll find anything related to missing travelers." The search that followed tested every aspect of the concealment plan that Josh and Catherine had developed. Catherine was hidden in a root cellar beneath the ranch house kitchen, a space that Josh had modified to provide both hiding and ventilation. The incriminating documents were buried in a sealed container near the ranch's main water tank, a location that would be unlikely to attract attention during a casual search. As Daniels and his men examined the ranch buildings and surrounding area, Josh maintained the casual demeanor of someone who had nothing to hide, while carefully monitoring their activities to ensure that they didn't discover Catherine's hiding place or the buried evidence. The most dangerous moment came when one of the searchers noticed that the kitchen floor showed signs of recent disturbance near the concealed entrance to the root cellar. Josh was forced to provide a plausible explanation for the disturbed floor, while preventing the man from conducting a more thorough investigation. "I spilled a barrel of flour last week," Josh said casually. "Had to pull up some of the floorboards to clean out the mess before it attracted ants and mice." The searcher accepted Josh's explanation, but the close call convinced both Josh and Catherine that their current situation was unsustainable. They needed to either eliminate the threat posed by Thomas Ashford's network, or find a way to escape to safety before their luck ran out and their deception was discovered. The solution to their dilemma would require them to take the offensive against people who had been hunting them, transforming themselves from hunted prey into hunters, capable of bringing justice to criminals who had believed themselves beyond the reach of the law. Justice in the depth. Decision to take the offensive against Thomas Ashford and his network of criminal associates required Josh Crawford and Catherine Ashford to transform themselves from fugitives hiding in the desert into active participants in a campaign that would bring federal law enforcement into direct confrontation with some of California's most powerful and dangerous men. The key to their strategy lay in the documents that Catherine had hidden and Josh had retrieved from Sacramento, combined with additional evidence that they would need to gather to build an unassailable case against the opium smuggling operation. But accomplishing this goal would require them to outmaneuver professional killers, while working with federal authorities who might be corrupted by the same influences that had protected Ashford's activities in San Francisco. Catherine's knowledge of her husband's operation provided crucial intelligence about the timing and methods of the smuggling activities, while Josh's familiarity with desert travel and his network of contacts throughout Southern California gave them logistical advantages that Ashford's urban-based associates couldn't match. "Josh," Catherine said as they finalized their plans, "there's something I need to tell you that I haven't mentioned before. Thomas and his partners are expecting a major shipment of opium to arrive in Los Angeles next week. If we can coordinate with federal agents to intercept that shipment, we'll have evidence that even corrupted officials won't be able to ignore." Josh understood that intercepting the shipment would require precise timing and coordination with federal authorities, who could be trusted to act on the information without alerting Ashford's network to the operation. But it would also require them to emerge from hiding and expose themselves to retaliation from people who had already proven their willingness to commit murder. The federal agent who proved willing to work with them was Marshal Robert Harrison, a career law enforcement officer whose investigation of customs corruption had already brought him into conflict with some of the same officials who were protecting Ashford's operation. Marshal Harrison had been looking for evidence that would allow him to move against the smuggling network, and Catherine's documents provided exactly the breakthrough he needed. Mrs. Ashford, Marshal Harrison said during their clandestine meeting at a remote way station between Los Angeles and the Ironwood Ranch. The evidence you've provided confirms suspicions that we've had for months about corruption in the customs office and the police department. But to make arrests that will stick, we need to catch these people in the act of handling contraband. Marshal, Catherine replied. I can tell you exactly when and where the next shipment will arrive, and I can identify the officials who have been bribed to facilitate the operation. But you need to understand that my husband and his partners will kill anyone who threatens to expose them. Marshal Harrison had dealt with dangerous criminals throughout his career, but Catherine's account of the murders that had been committed to protect the smuggling operation convinced him that extraordinary precautions would be necessary to ensure the safety of witnesses and law enforcement personnel. The plan that emerged from their discussions required Josh and Catherine to remain in hiding until the federal operation was complete, while providing ongoing intelligence that would help Marshal Harrison coordinate the arrests of Thomas Ashford and his entire network. But their careful planning was threatened by Frank Daniels' continued investigation of the area around Devil's Canyon and his growing suspicion that Catherine Ashford might have survived her abandonment in the desert. Daniels had returned to the Ironwood Ranch twice more, each time asking more pointed questions about Josh's activities and demanding more thorough searches of the property. Mr. Crawford, Daniels said during his most recent visit, I've been thinking about our previous conversations, and I have some additional questions about what you found in Devil's Canyon. Josh maintained his story about discovering wagon wreckage, but no bodies. But he could see that Daniels was becoming increasingly skeptical of his account. The killer's persistence suggested that Thomas Ashford was growing suspicious about his wife's fate and was applying pressure on his associates to find definitive proof of her death. Daniels, Josh said, deciding to take a more aggressive approach. You've searched my property 3 times and haven't found anything related to your missing travelers. Maybe it's time to expand your search to other areas of the desert. But Daniels' response revealed that Josh's suggestion had inadvertently confirmed the killer's suspicions about Catherine's survival. Mr. Crawford, Daniels said with a cold smile. I think you know more about these missing travelers than you've been telling us. And I think we need to have a more detailed conversation about what you've been doing in the desert. The confrontation that followed would test both Josh's courage and Catherine's strategic thinking, as they found themselves facing immediate threats from professional killers while trying to coordinate with federal authorities, who were preparing to move against the smuggling network. The climax came when Daniels and his men surrounded the Ironwood Ranch at dawn, demanding that Josh produce Catherine Ashford or face the consequences of his deception. But Josh and Catherine had anticipated this possibility and had prepared defenses that would allow them to hold off the attackers until Marshal Harrison could arrive with federal agents. Crawford, Daniels shouted from his position behind a water trough. We know the Ashford woman is here. Send her out and we might let you live. Josh's response came not in words but in rifle fire that sent Daniels and his men scrambling for better cover, while Catherine signaled to Marshal Harrison's forces, who had been positioned in the surrounding desert, waiting for exactly this confrontation. The gun battle that followed lasted 3 hours and ended with the death of Frank Daniels and the capture of his surviving associates, providing federal authorities with witnesses who could testify about Thomas Ashford's criminal activities and his involvement in multiple murders. The evidence gathered from the captured killers, combined with Catherine's documents and the intercepted opium shipment, provided Marshal Harrison with everything needed to destroy the entire smuggling network and bring justice to people who had believed themselves beyond the reach of the law. Thomas Ashford was arrested in San Francisco 2 days later, along with 12 associates and 6 corrupted government officials. The trial that followed became a sensation throughout California, exposing the scope of corruption that had allowed the smuggling operation to flourish, while revealing the courage of the desert rancher and the abandoned wife who had brought the criminals to justice. But for Josh and Catherine, the most important outcome was not the legal victory, but the relationship that had developed between them during their fight for survival and justice. Catherine's marriage to Thomas had been annulled due to his criminal conviction, leaving her free to build a new life with the man who had saved her in more ways than one. Josh, Catherine said as they stood together watching the sunset from the porch of the Ironwood Ranch, now safely their home together. When I was dying in that desert, I never imagined that my rescue would lead to something as wonderful as this. Catherine, Josh replied. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives create opportunities for the best things that can happen to us. Your courage in fighting your husband's corruption saved more lives than just your own. They were married 6 months later, creating a partnership that combined Catherine's intelligence and determination with Josh's integrity and desert wisdom. The Ironwood Ranch became a symbol of justice and second chances, proving that love could flourish even in the harshest environments when people were willing to fight for what was right. If this incredible story about courage, survival, and love triumphing over corruption moved your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories about ordinary people who refuse to let evil win. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes our darkest moments lead to our greatest victories. Comment below and tell us about a time when someone's kindness changed your life. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest inspiring stories. Remember, true heroes aren't born. They're made by the choices they make when faced with impossible odds. This remarkable story reminds us that sometimes the most significant acts of heroism begin with simple human kindness, offering water to someone who is dying, listening to their story, and choosing to act on what we learn. Josh Crawford's decision to help Catherine Ashford revealed corruption that extended to the highest levels of California society, and demonstrated that individual courage can challenge even the most powerful criminal enterprises. Catherine's survival and her willingness to fight back against the men who tried to murder her proved that victims can become victors when they refuse to accept injustice and find allies willing to stand with them. Her transformation from an abandoned woman dying in the desert to a key witness in a federal prosecution shows that our worst moments can become the foundation for our greatest achievements. The love story that emerged from their shared struggle illustrates that the strongest relationships are often forged in adversity, when people discover they can trust each other with their lives and their deepest secrets. Josh and Catherine's partnership proved that love based on mutual respect, shared values, and common purpose can overcome any obstacle. Their victory over Thomas Ashford's criminal network demonstrates that corruption, no matter how well connected or powerful, cannot ultimately prevail against people who are willing to risk everything to expose the truth. Sometimes justice requires not just moral conviction, but also strategic thinking, careful planning, and the courage to take action when the moment is right.